Before the red carpets, before the flashing cameras and golden statues, they wore uniforms. They weren't just stars. They were sailors, pilots, soldiers, real men who traded scripts for service and fame for duty. This is the forgotten chapter of Hollywood history, the one where the biggest names in show business stepped away from the spotlight to answer a call far louder than applause. They didn't just act like heroes. They were heroes, from sound stages to battlefields, from Hollywood to the front lines. These were the actors who put their country before their careers and returned with stories too real for any film. James Stewart, the star who took to the skies, before he became America's favorite everyman. Jimmy Stewart was already dreaming of the skies. When World War II broke out, he didn't wait for a draft notice. He volunteered. By then, he was already famous, with films like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, making him a household name. But fame meant nothing compared to duty. Stewart joined the U.S. Army Air Corps, trained as a pilot, and earned every promotion with skill, not celebrity. He didn't just support the troops. He was one, flying dangerous missions over Nazi-occupied Europe, commanding entire squadrons of bombers. By the war's end, he had risen to the rank of Brigadier General, the highest-ranking actor in American military history. When he returned to Hollywood, he wasn't the same. His eyes carried something deeper, the kind of humanity that made It's a Wonderful Life and Rear Window resonate for generations. Jimmy Stewart didn't just play an American hero. He was one. Clark Gable, the king who went to war. At the height of his fame, Clark Gable was untouchable, Hollywood royalty. After Gone with the Wind, he could have stayed home, enjoyed his wealth, and lived comfortably as a legend. But tragedy changed everything. When his beloved wife, Carole Lombard, was killed in a plane crash returning from a war bond tour, Gable was shattered. So, at age 41, he enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Forces. No press conferences, no cameras, just a broken man determined to serve. He trained as an aerial gunner, flew in B-17 bombers, and joined dangerous missions over Europe, often alongside men young enough to be his sons. Hitler himself reportedly placed a bounty on Gable's head. When he came home, he was changed, older, quieter, hardened. He didn't need to prove he was a man. He already had. Charles Bronson, the silent warrior. Before the fame, before death wish made him the face of vengeance. Charles Bronson was just Charles Buchinski, the son of a poor coal miner from Pennsylvania. He grew up with hardship in his blood and grit in his bones. When the war began, he joined the U.S. Army Air Forces and served as an aerial gunner in the Pacific.
Bronson flew 25 combats mission à bord B-29 bombeurs.
He was wounded in action and earned the Purple Heart. He rarely spoke about it later, but the war shaped him completely. When you watch him on screen, that quiet rage, that steel behind his eyes, you're not seeing a performance. You're seeing memory. Charles Bronson didn't act tough. He was tough. Paul Newman, the reluctant hero. Before the piercing blue eyes, before Cool Hand Luke, Paul Newman was just another young man, trying to find his place in the world. He joined the U.S. Navy, hoping to become a pilot, but colorblindness kept him grounded. Instead, he served as a radio operator and rear gunner, aboard torpedo bombers in the Pacific. One fateful day before the Battle of Okinawa, his pilot developed an ear infection, grounding Newman's crew. The next day, their replacement aircraft was shot down. Every man aboard was killed. That narrow escape changed his life. He never bragged about his service, but it left a quiet strength in him, a humility that defined the man behind the charm. Lee Marvin, the Marine who carried his scars. Before the grizzled voice and icy glare of Hollywood's ultimate tough guy, Lee Marvin fought in one of the war's most brutal campaigns, the Battle of Saipan. Serving as a U.S. Marine, he was shot in the back by machine gun fire and nearly died. He earned the Purple Heart and spent months recovering. Marvin carried that experience with him for the rest of his life. You could see it in every role. The pain, the realism, the haunted stillness. Lee Marvin didn't have to act broken. He was Tony Curtis, from Bronx Kid to Navy Man. Before some like It Hot or Spartacus, Tony Curtis was just a kid from the Bronx, a dreamer named Bernard Schwartz. At 17, he enlisted in the Navy. He served aboard a submarine tender in the Pacific, helping rescue sailors and witnessing the horrors of war at sea. It was the first time he truly saw the world. After the war, he used the GI Bill to study acting. From those humble beginnings, he built himself into a Hollywood star, but never forgot the boy who once wore a sailor's uniform. Tony Curtis didn't talk much about his service. He didn't have to. It lived inside him. Henry Fonda, the conscience of America. By the time the U.S. entered the war, Henry Fonda was already a leading man, respected, admired, and secure. But when asked why he joined the Navy, his answer was simple: "I don't want to be in a fake war in a studio." He served as a quartermaster on a destroyer, and later as an air combat intelligence officer, earning the Bronze Star. His post-war roles carried that unmistakable weight, a calm moral authority born from real service. When you watch 12 Angry Men or The Grapes of Wrath, you're not seeing a performance. You're seeing a man who had truly lived what he believed. Jack Palance, the scarred pilot. Before he became Hollywood's favorite villain, Jack Palance, born Volodymyr Polonuk, was a boxer and bomber pilot. During a training flight, he crashed, suffering facial injuries that would forever mark his appearance. Those scars gave him his haunting, chiseled look, the very image that later made him famous. Every cold-blooded gunslinger he played was built on something real: pain, survival, and memory. Kirk Douglas, the fighter with fire in his eyes. Before he was Spartacus, Kirk Douglas was the son of poor immigrants, working odd jobs to survive the Great Depression. When America joined the war, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy and served as a communications officer on anti-submarine patrols in the Pacific. He wasn't a hero by medal count, but he was the embodiment of determination. That fiery willpower became his signature, on screen and off. Telly Savalas, the medic with a soul. Before Kojak, before the lollipops and the catchphrases, Telly Savalas was a U.S. Army medic. He served on the front lines, was wounded in combat, and earned a Purple Heart. After the war, he studied psychology and broadcasting, but the war never truly left him. That mix of grit and compassion made his performances magnetic. Behind every tough guy he played, there was a man who had seen things. Don Knotts, the comic on the front lines. We remember Don Knotts as the nervous, lovable deputy from the Andy Griffith Show. But during the war, he was a different kind of hero. Serving in the Army's Special Services, Knotts toured the Pacific performing comedy sketches for soldiers. He made men laugh in the darkest days of their lives. He may not have carried a gun, but he carried morale, and sometimes that's just as brave. Walter Matthau, the cryptographer who knew silence. Before the sarcasm and wit, Walter Matthau was a cryptographer in the Army Air Forces. Stationed in England, he decoded enemy transmissions, and even manned anti-aircraft guns during German raids. That quiet seriousness, that hint of melancholy behind the humor, came from a man who'd already seen the cost of war. George C. Scott, the guard who honored the fallen. Before Patton, George C. Scott was a Marine, stationed not on a battlefield, but in solemn service at Arlington National Cemetery. There, he stood watch as fallen soldiers were laid to rest. Every day, he witnessed the price of war. And when he finally played General Patton, you could feel it, that gravity, that respect, that understanding. They were more than movie stars. They were soldiers, airmen, sailors. They traded scripts for service. They gave up fame for freedom. They didn't just play heroes, they were heroes. And when they came back, Hollywood and America would never be the same.